聊天聊到一半，突然间变得好安静。那这个时候很尴尬，怎么办呢？那在我们今天的单元中，我们会来提供各种不同的聊天不败的句型，还有问题，让你就算没有话讲，还是可以很轻松的继续聊下去。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管双语沟通力的 Podcast。我们希望带给大家最实用的沟通工具，包括了成功人士对全球市场的分享、职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。Hi, I'm Sherry, founder of Executive Plus. As a language trainer and certified coach, I've trained hundreds of managers from Fortune 500 companies such as Dior, Google, Deloitte, and Yahoo.
And I'm Nick, Director of Communication Strategy at Presentality.I've helped startups raise millions of US dollars in funding and train the executives of publicly listed companies to present on the global stage.
Welcome to the Executive Plus podcast,
where you can take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Now in the past, we've talked a lot about small talk.How to do it before a conference call or an in-person meeting, or any kind of situation where you're formally waiting for something to happen. But what about those other times where you're standing in a room, whether it's at a work gathering or a party, and there's just that awkward silence, that moment where no one's talking? How do you get a conversation going that doesn't seem too surface, but it actually gets people engaged?
就像 Nick 所讲的，我们一定都有经过这样在跟一群人或者在跟一个人在讲话的时候，突然间好像两个人都不知道要讲什么 There's nothing to talk about and you have that super awkward silence. And I think everyone hates that.
Yeah, it's a really weird moment, and everyone can just picture like in a movie setting where there's like some awkward blind date and they're just sitting there drinking their water or wine and they have nothing to say to each other.
I'm going to hydrate now.
Yeah,
所以今天我们针对这种状况，我们想给大家一些建议，一些 framework 跟一些主题或者一些小技巧，让大家真的碰到这种状况，或者是你可能没有话讲的时候，你还是可以继续的聊下去。
In the past, we've given you topics that you should really steer away from. Things like money, religion, politics, anything that might be a bit controversial.Well, what are the safe topics? Now, a lot of people talk about, safe topics are things like current events and weather and news. And this can be true, but not everyone cares about sports. Not everyone really wants to have a discussion about the clouds in the sky. So what can you talk about? Well, there's a really fun acronym that Sherry found online, and it makes a lot of sense.
So the acronym is FORD, Ford. F, family.O, occupation, R, recreation, and D, dreams.
And a lot of people may think that these seem a bit personal, especially the last one, dreams. But I was reading something else recently, and someone brought up an interesting idea. He says that it's not that introverts really don't like talking in general. It's they don't care for small talk. They actually don't want to talk about the weather or news or perhaps like people that they don't know very well. They don't want to hear gossip about that. They actually want to know more about the other person. Like that's an engaging topic. And so what Ford gives you is an opportunity to better understand someone by hitting these key topics. Now, not everyone wants to talk about their family, but you can cycle through them to figure out what has someone open up.Which is actually quite key to our next point, which is when having a discussion about these topics, the way that you ask questions will also guide the conversation.
Exactly. 我们这一个部分呢，其实在很早之前我们的一个 episode 我们就有提到，那这个是我们之前在讲 negotiation。Chris Voss 就有讲到一个很重要的重点，就是当你要在做 negotiation 的时候，你一定要试着问 the open-ended question. 那所谓 open-ended question 就是 the WH question 跟 how question. 那 close-ended question 也就是我们的 do you like, did you like, are you 就是让人家直接就可以回答 yes 跟 no. 那为什么我们在聊天的时候最好不要问这种 close-ended question? 因为有可能他就会跟你讲 yes 跟 no 然后就没了 right? It just closed the conversation completely.
let's take a look at how to handle open-ended questions along with our forward safe topics. So let's start with something a little less personal, but something that most people can talk about, like occupation. Now, of course, your first question would just be like, oh, so what do you do?
Yeah.
And someone may just respond with a very basic answer, like, oh, I'm a consultant.
Yeah.
Now, if I stayed with a close-ended question, I'd be like, do you like it?
Yeah.
Right? So this is where you end up with that very close-ended question.
Yeah.
But if I switched around to this more open-ended style and I said, oh, so what do you do?
I'm a consultant.
Oh, what's your favorite thing about being a consultant?
Oh, I love talking to clients and I love that interaction with my clients.
When was the moment that like really got you into consulting?
Oh, it must have been about 10 years ago when I was teaching a group class and I just really enjoyed that atmosphere. So in a moment, I just decided that this is what I want to do forever.
So as you can see there, of course, we're role-playing this, so you may think that we're staging it. But the reality is, when you go after these close-ended questions, you're going to get a close-ended answer. And unless the person's very chatty, they're not going to expand on their answer. But when you start to ask questions that it doesn't seem very personal, but typically the answer will start to tell you a bit about them, like, what's your favorite thing?
Yeah.
Or what's the moment that got you into this? Then people actually reflect on it a bit. But one of the keys that you have to do is if you ask an open-ended question, don't expect like a turnaround 1 second answer. Sometimes people need to reflect, but when they have the time to reflect, the type of answer that you'll get back is usually really worth listening to.
Yeah, 我觉得这边很重要一点，刚刚 Nick 有稍微提到，就是通常我们可以说很多人是内向的跟外向的人，我们一个 introverts and extroverts。那大部分人会觉得，内向的人就是不太想讲话，他比较害羞 ，it's shy， 他不是很喜欢讲话，他不喜欢聊天。那其实 that's definitely not true， 因为其实内向的人他们喜欢聊的是比较有深度的东西，他喜欢能够了解跟这个人能够做一个连接，所以我觉得这些 open-ended question 它跟不同的人都能够聊天，那这个聊天的内容它也是比较有深度而且比较有价值。 Like what Nick said, sometimes when you're asking a question like, oh, what was the moment that got you, you decided to go into your career? They may go, oh, that's a really good question. Let me think about that, right? It takes them a few seconds to think about it. 但是我觉得这个 it's worth the wait. 因为当他如果能够跟你讲他的想法的时候，对方他也会记得你这个问题。Because that's a really good question to ask.
One quick tip that actually comes from Chris Voss as well is to avoid why questions.
Oh, yeah.
Because why can be an open-ended question, but typically the phrasing of why starts to like grade people in the wrong way.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if they don't understand how to play with tone. 这个时候跟语气语调又有点关系。比如说你今天好了 let's say I'm in a really bad mood today. And then you go, what do you do? I'm a consultant.
Why did you start being a consultant?
I may take that in a very...
yeah, the tone that you may hear is
exactly.
not like, oh, why did you start consulting? And it's more like, why would you do that?
Exactly. 如果那天我已经对我的工作的 performance 或者是我碰到了一些问题 and then you go ask me, why are you a consultant? I'm like, what do you mean why? Right? 所以这个时候我可能就会 unnecessarily 我可能就会变得有点 defensive for no reason at all. But again, you want to avoid that.Right? You don't know what the other person's going through right now. So just changing that question a little bit, change it into what was the reason you went into consulting?
Like the question I asked before is like, when was the moment that got you into consulting?
Yeah.
And these just seem a little bit safer. Yeah. I think just a lot of people have kind of PTSD about why. It's actually one of my favorite brand names is the children's brand Y&A. Because I think most parents when their kids are very young in English have that fear when they like their kids ask them something. Be like, why is the sky blue? Like, oh, because, the water and the ocean, why? And then it just becomes a fear, right? So this is just something people have. So avoiding why questions is usually a good idea.
I think this is a very good trick, especially in the workplace.
So another thing that you can use as part of the conversation in order to keep it going is to make associations. And the association can be to yourself or to the other person. So if I ask Sherry, what does she do? And she says, I'm a consultant, and I ask what got her into it. And then she'll talk about, maybe the passion of working with someone or helping someone. Then I may turn that and also be like, oh, this really reminds me of my uncle, who's also a consultant for major food brands. And, he started out because it was a good business, but he really enjoyed helping entrepreneurs kind of find their food dream. Make that association, and then maybe that will stir on something else from Sherry about her own experience.
Playing this reminds me of, you could remind me of someone that we know, or reminds me of a situation, 或者是你也可以 reminds me of a movie or a television show, right?
Yeah.
And that might just stir someone else's interest, and maybe definitely that conversation can get carried on.
Right. So if you're having that awkward moment, maybe in one of your favorite movies, there's this awkward moment. So I'd be like, oh, this really reminds me of the scene in that movie where, they're just standing around in the coffee shop.
Yeah. Now, I really like this one. 因为以前在国外的时候常做一些 networking events 呢，这个时候我们都会一群人，有的时候是3-4个人啊，站在一起讲话，然后就突然间又没有人讲话，或者是 silence。One really good trick and one really good question. 如果今天你本身是一个新的人，那其他人可能都比较熟悉对方，他们都是认识的。This is what you can ask. You can say, so, how did you guys know one another? That's always a really good question to ask because they can start talking about their stories.
Right. Or if you've been invited to a party or a gathering by a specific host, you can always ask, oh, how do you know the host? Or how do you know the organizer of this event? Weddings, that will also...
Yes, I thought about that.
A lot of people will be like, oh, do you know the bride or the groom? Or how do you know? Right.
Yeah. 在台湾好像比较不太需要问这个，因为我们会分边坐。
Oh, yeah, because you guys are already there, right? I mean, sometimes they'll put old work friends or new work friends or something like that. But in general, you always know at least at minimum which side you're on.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. 那说到我们刚刚有提到 dreams, right? Remember part of our topics that we talked about, dreams, D as in dreams. I think something that we could... And again, I think this is something we can ask someone that we know, or maybe someone we don't really know really well. You can always ask, oh, what's any exciting plans this year? Any exciting trip you're taking next year?
So you can always ask about the future or anything that's going on. I think some of the other people in our office, whenever they see me, the most dreaded question is always be like, oh, any exciting plans for this weekend? But there's a small trick to that. And the reason that you use things like exciting is because whether they have something exciting or not, they will usually respond with an answer. If I just looked at you and said, do you have any plans for this weekend? It's very easy to go, oh, no. But if I go, anything exciting this weekend? Even if the answer is no, usually it'd be like, no, I don't have any plans. I'll probably just do this.
Yeah.
Right? And so by throwing in that one qualifier, you change the answer that even if the answer is no, they will actually explain the answer and you have a chance to start the conversation.
And I think everything we talked about today just really allows you to connect with this other person a lot better and understand them a lot better.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed this how to start the small talk. So remember, again, 4 safe, easy topics to remember: family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. Forward. And always ask open-ended questions, but avoid starting with why. We hope that these tips help you, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
如果你喜欢我们的 podcast， 欢迎来追踪我们的主管英文 Executive Plus 的 Facebook。那也可以写信到我们的信箱 yourcareerplus@gmail.com。